You can only rent it to 6 months out of the year. Secondary suites can also be rented, but they can only be rented if you're living in your primary residence full time. So there is a bit of flexibility there, but also that is only for 6 months out of the year. The city has defined short-term rentals as 30 days and under. That's important to remember, especially when we get to the provincial ruling. And the fines have been increased by the city of Vancouver to $3,000 per infraction per day. So that could be a sizable chunk that any owner could end up owing the city if they pursue to go after them. If you check on the City of Vancouver website, there's about 274 cases now that are going in front of the courts where the city is actually taking people to court over some of these fines. So it'll be interesting to see what some of those rulings end up. Now for the province, they've brought in, or they will be bringing in their changes. So once again, you'll need a business license. It has to be your principal residence. And you can rent your principal residence and up to one secondary suite for up to 6 months out of the year. So that's a small change. It'll be interesting to see how the courts are going to interpret that, because somebody could technically live in their principal residence for 6 months and then move into a secondary suite for 6 months and just keep swapping back and forth. I don't think that's the intent, but that's the rule. The rules apply for population centers that are basically less than 10,000, or sorry, that are more than 10,000 people, so the bigger cities. And exempt areas are ski resorts and the Island Trust. And then there's a few other exemptions for smaller rural areas as well. Short term is defined as 90 days or less. So this is very interesting that this is different from the City of Vancouver. It used to be that the Residential Tenancy Act also phrases short-term as less than 60 days. So we've got 3 different definitions now. So it's going to be interesting how this pans out in terms of tax implications. Typically, the city has the view if any booking is for less than 30 days that you have to pay GST, hotel tax, and provincial sales tax. The province has the view if any booking is less than 60 days that you should be paying provincial sales tax on those rentals. And if it's 90 days, you would be tax exempt. So most of the people then would probably switch to rentals that are 90 days or longer to avoid some of those taxes. Now, the fines for the province fall under the Offence Act, which will be up to $50,000 per occurrence. So that's quite a sizable chunk as well. Now, the next slide, Angel. The timeline for legislation would be May 1st, 2024. The rules are going to go into effect. By the summer, the province is requiring data sharing from the rental platform. So Airbnb, who will likely fight this a bit, but they will have to share their owners and addresses for rental properties. In the fall of 2024, the provincial registration will be set up. This is basically going to be similar to the registration that people have to do with the City of Vancouver for their rental properties. And owners will not be allowed to advertise without being on the registry. So they will try to, or I guess they will force the rental platforms to take any listing down that's not registered on the actual platform. And for more information, you can go to the government website. So what does all this mean? The province is trying to give more powers to the municipalities and the cities to crack down on the offenders, higher fines, more enforcement. Taxes, obviously the city and the province want their share of the income. In some cities like New York and Montreal, Airbnb collects the taxes directly and pays them directly to the city. I'm not 100% sure if this is what's going to be happening in Vancouver. There's also tax implications for the homeowners when they go to sell the properties. If you've had a property that you've used primarily as a rental, you could be required to pay GST on the sale. So you have to consult your tax lawyer. It's very important. There's been a few cases in Ontario where this has happened. Buyers were unaware and they got stuck with a tax bill. So it's very important to to keep that in mind when you're looking at properties with your clients that were previously rented. And then the money is supposed to go towards more enforcement, and that's where the city of Vancouver has been falling flat, because they brought in these rules about 2 years ago, but they haven't had a lot of enforcement. Therefore, a lot of people are still breaking the rules, and you've got buildings like 555 Abbott or 688 Abbott, where they're basically running hundreds of Airbnbs in those buildings. None of them are primary residences. So as a realtor then, you need to be careful when you're advertising for sale, because a lot of realtors put Airbnb friendly or Airbnb allowed. This opens you up for a lot of liability. Somebody could potentially argue in court that you were advertising that Airbnb rentals were allowed. They didn't understand what that meant, bought the property, ended up with fines, and now they're going after you. Furnished rentals will likely convert to more long-term rentals of 90 nights or plus. So this implication for listings when you're selling a property, basically is the Tenancy Act. So you have to know the rights that the tenant has. I would encourage anyone to take the course from the real estate boards, the selling tenanted occupied properties. It definitely can show you all the pitfalls. But the main thing is that you need to be aware of the timelines of subject removal, getting the notice in for the tenant to vacate, how much time is needed for that. And then also bookending the move-in for the new owners with the move-out for the tenants correctly, that it's not on the same day, because you'll probably need 2 or 3 days just to get the unit clean. The other sort of implication is there's a shortage of hotel room nights in the city, and that will continue to be an issue in Vancouver. And this is not addressed by any of this. So that's sort of an unfortunate consequence. And it'll be interesting to see if there will be more pushback trying to get more Airbnb rentals allowed in the city again. So that's basically it. So I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions, Klaus. So what are your customers saying?
Most of the people, I mean, we do 60-night minimum anyways, so we're not as affected. But we are getting a few people that have done short-term rentals that are now converting, and they're signing up on the longer term rentals.
Okay, so that's a plus for you to get the business.
Yeah,
because we don't, in this brokerage, we don't do short-term rentals. So I was just wondering if you had anybody that you knew that was saying, okay, I guess the gig's up. Airbnb, when you mentioned when you were saying that careful what the listing agent says when they're doing the write-ups on the property, and when you say Airbnb allowed, what is a safer way to say that, so we're not assuming or implying that something that we don't know?
Just get more specific. Airbnb rentals allowed under city, provincial, and strata bylaws. Okay. Just so that you put it out there that they have to do further investigation, because if somebody argues in court as a customer that they didn't understand what they were buying and you didn't explain it to them properly, there could be a case made to hold you liable for that, for misrepresentation, basically.
Okay. Hey, Klaus, I have a question. The GST that you mentioned, is that for the short-term rentals only, or even for the 1-year rentals that ever?
It's for the short-term.
Just for the short-term rentals.
So if a unit was exclusively used for Airbnb rentals and the owners didn't pay the taxes properly and didn't file taxes, there could be GST payable on the sale of the property. In Ontario, they're also ruling that a lot of these properties that are used as short-term rentals are actual businesses, and therefore on the sale are liable for GST.
I didn't know that, but it kind of makes sense. It kind of goes back to, you know, the government is trying to get some more affordable housing and rentals and stuff, but they still want to get their tax. It's like when they did the COVID change, when COVID came and they're going to give renters subsidies. So I think the inner plan was, let's get all these renters to tell us where they're renting and see if those places are registered, so they can tax the landlords, right? So But anyway, I just wish the government wouldn't keep squeezing the juice out of stuff that's really not there. Anybody else have any questions for Klaus? Because I know he's got to take off somewhere. I think this was a great insight to what's coming. Anything that you think is going to come on top of this, Klaus? Like any modifications?
Well, I think in the long run, they're going to have to look at the accommodations in Vancouver, period. I mean, it's the shortage of hotel room nights is really an issue for the city. I mean, if you look at the Sandman Inn, and I know this for experience, during COVID, we stayed there for $75 a night. They're currently charging $477 a night. That's a basic hotel room, and that's just crazy. So, I mean, you're creating a resort city that no one is going to be able to come to visit.
Wow.
And Airbnb sort of, you know, helped offset some of that. But when they started cracking down on it, you know, hotel room nights went up very, there's a direct correlation there. And in all honesty, I mean, if you look at the numbers, Airbnb represented maybe what 1 or 2% of all rentals in the city. It's not a lot. It's not the bad thing people make it out to be, but it's you know, it gets the clicks, it gets the news, right? It's something to complain about.
That's an interesting stat. Karen, you had your hand up.
Excuse me. Yes, you mentioned that there's 3 different distinctions for short-term rental. You said in Vancouver, it's 30 days, and with the tenancy board, it's 60 days.
Yep.
And then what was the 90 days?
90 days is the provincial for the new legislation for short-term rentals.
Wow. Okay.
Which makes absolutely no sense. It's they should have just gone to 60 days just to keep everything consistent with the RTB. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, they chose 90 days as the magic number.
Melissa, did you have a question as well?
Just going to say, just so it just sounds like we like pretty much standard should be adding a clause addressing it no matter what, because you're not always going to know the history of the property and there's no way of knowing. So just including that clause, like that, you know, whether it be a warrant or just that it's not, and I'll look, because I know that they changed all the standard warrants and representations, and it almost addresses and encompasses everything. If they're going to add something to that, but also just adding it for ourselves in every single contract.
Yeah, I think there's still a standard GST clause in web forms, and I think that's the one I would use personally. Just to be sure that the seller warns that any GST has been paid or will be paid. So if they're sure that there was no GST, they shouldn't have a problem signing that.
We'll send that reminder out to everybody, including the Airbnb clause, just to make sure that the other side does their due diligence, right? Amir, you had your hand up?
Yeah, there's this pre-sale coming up called Templeton, and they're selling units with walkout suites too. So they're selling 1 bedrooms, like it's a 3-bedroom with 1 bedroom as a walkout suite. So, and they're selling them probably like you can sell them as rent them out as Airbnb and short-term rentals. So would they be taxed with GST and PST as well if people are renting them out for Airbnb?
Yeah, it should be, because it's short-term rentals. So and I think the way they're going and other cities have gone is that Airbnb collects the funds and then pays the taxes directly to the city.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really where the province wants to go with this, just so that, you know, it's easier for them to collect the funds. I mean, right now you're supposed to obviously declare all the money as income and then pay out the taxes on that. But you also have to remember the official city rule is only 6 months out of the year, even if it's your secondary suite.
Anybody else with questions? Oh, Karen's got one more.
So is that a new ruling that it could only be 60 days for a primary suite and a secondary suite?
No, it's 6 months for primary or principal. So that's not a new rule. When the city brought in the original legislation to crack down on Airbnb, it was already just supposed to be for 6 months out of the year, and it had to be your primary residence. So that hasn't changed. It's never been enforced. Right, so that's the problem. So a lot of stratas are now starting to look at the the rentals in some of the buildings, and they're cracking down on it. So there's a few emails that have gone out to owners saying, look, you're renting it out too much. You're going past the 6 months. And eventually, I think they're going to ask for either calendars with bookings to count the number of days that are rented. And then the data sharing from the platforms by next year should make that easier for the province to just verify and enforce that it's only 6 months or less.
Okay, well, thanks, Klaus. Appreciate you doing that, and we'll safe trip to Vancouver on Friday. And I look forward to seeing you next week. What are you dressing up as for Halloween?
I'm not sure. I'll dress up as a realtor. How about that?
All right. I look forward to seeing you, bud. Safe travels.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Okay, thank you for organizing this. And if you need me, just reach out. And thank you to Klaus again for his Airbnb insight and being the backup broker, because he's always very reliable. Him and Lewis, they're amazing individuals. Okay, guys, I'm out. We'll talk to you later.